Hi, I'm Irving, and I have no life, just like you.
The Ballad of Irving. Irving. Big fat Irving. Big sport Irving. The 142nd fastest gun in the West.
After Call of Duty 3, the franchise started going in a different direction with the Modern Warfare series. It's incredible, of course, and we'll get to that in due time. But fortunately for people like me, they made one more World War II game using next-generation graphics, language, and rendering. This is Call of Duty 4 World at War. So we have two Call of Duty 4 games to go with our two Call of Duty 2 games. Both are magnificent games, and both are worth owning and playing again and again. But there's one thing about World at War that I've been waiting for a very long time. We spend some time in the Pacific Theater. A big chunk of this game follows a Marine sent to take part in MacArthur's campaign to push the Japanese back to Japan and liberate all the island nations they'd conquered. If you've watched this show for any length of time, you've heard me engage in a little mumble-grumble about how so many games focus on Europe and seem to ignore the fact that America was fighting a war on two fronts, in Europe and also in the Pacific. In fact, it was the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the U.S. into the war in the first place. Up to that time, most Americans were taking the attitude that it's not our problem. Suddenly it was. It's nice to see war games starting to turn in that direction. The controls are pretty typical for this series. The sound, naturally, is outstanding. But as with all the previous games, the main thing that sets this game apart is action. You have bullets, grenades, tank shells, bazooka shells, aerial bombs, and who knows what else going off around you non-stop, and the enemies come in waves that are impossible to count. But a big improvement over the earlier games is, there's now a certain number of enemies, and when you eliminate them, they're gone. Remember the endless stream of soldiers filing into view from wherever in the first game? Not here. The enemy has a certain number of soldiers, and when they're gone, they're gone.
Ooh, I like it muy macho.
No more enemies spontaneously spawning behind me or on top of my head, and when you shoot them, they go down. As with Call of Duty 3, whether they stay down or not depends on where you shoot them. If you shoot a guy in the foot, he'll go down for a few seconds, but then he'll get back up and keep fighting. Shoot him in the head, he goes down and stays down. It pays to be careful with your aim. The game begins with some rapid-fire graphics describing the events that led to the attack on Pearl Harbor. It builds up to President Roosevelt's famous radio address calling December 7, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. More rapid-fire graphics describe how America started cranking out war materials at an unprecedented rate, how young men enlisted by the thousands, and finally narrows down to Private Miller, your character. Private Miller is on Macon Atoll, a ring of sand and coral somewhere in the Pacific, and he's not having a very good time so far.
You think because you say nothing, you are strong? 貴様は強くない。強情なやつめ。Don't tell him a fucking thing. 米兵どもはみんなこうなのか。
The Marines come in and rescue you, and you're off and running. One thing we learned very early on is, we're not above a really dumb joke. But tish. Right off the bat, you encounter this. That was too cool for words. It's not often you get to use your melee attack in a World War II game, but you'll use it a lot in these levels. I only have one gripe. Clicking the right stick is supposed to stab the guy before he stabs you, but 3 times in a row it didn't work. I clicked repeatedly, mashed if you will, and still got killed. But everything in life's a trade-off. Check this out. First time I've ever used a bayonet. Cool. So you, your squad, and another squad that you happen to encounter start heading for extraction. As I understand it, the mission here was to rescue you from your captivity. Along the way, you run into trouble.
Ambush! Boom! Boom!
When that's done, you make your way to a Japanese emplacement near the beach where your extraction craft are. They have an ammunition bunker there, and it's your job to destroy it because you're the one with the explosive charges.
Ahem.
You again.
Of course. Do you really believe I could let such a glaring error pass unnoticed?
What error would that be?
Honestly, were it not for me, you would be without the slightest clue most of the time. Your Private Miller was a prisoner at the beginning of this sequence, correct?
Yes. What about it? The Marines sprung him.
Putting aside your impossibly ungrammatical statement, he then acquired a weapon, correct? How did he acquire it?
One of his buddies gave it to him. Later he picked one up from a dead enemy. Is there a point here somewhere?
But now he is planting explosives, correct?
I believe I already said that.
And how, pray tell, did he acquire those? To the best of my extensive knowledge, the Japanese army was not in the habit of letting their prisoners possess explosive charges. In point of actual fact, they...
I assume one of the other Marines gave him to him. Or he picked him up along the way. Or maybe he hit him up his...
Point taken. Please resume.
At least placing explosives is a lot less dull than it was in Call of Duty 3.
Damn! Driver's side. We may only get a few minutes before detonation. Charge is set. We're leaving now!
And really, this is the only time that you actually have to hold the button to place the charge. For the rest of the game, it's just press X to place the charge, and there it is. Very nice. So you get off that place and move on to the next island. If you remember your history, you know that General MacArthur took the Pacific back one island or atoll at a time, a method that history calls island hopping. We just took a big hop. A lot of the Pacific part of this game takes place on Peleliu, the site of one of the nastiest battles of the entire war. The Japanese were dug in tight in caves, bunkers, and sometimes just camouflaged holes in the ground, and could pop out and strike without any warning. The Americans had to take the island's airfield because it was wreaking havoc on our Navy, and then they had to clear the rest of the island almost foot by foot. We get to see a little of all that in this sequence. You've gotten here in a landing craft and you're fighting your way onto the island. Supposedly, you're not going to encounter much resistance.
This is it, Miller.
Okay, keep it together and we'll get through this in 3 days.
Sure. File that under the best laid plans. The Japanese are here in force, and they do not want to give up this island. Those Marines are in big trouble. One really cool thing you can do, and you'll want to do it as often as possible, is call in rocket strikes on Japanese fortified positions, like this.
Coordinates received.
You make your way inland toward the airfield, taking out mortar pits and stuff, and then you call in your rockets on a couple of tanks. But the level ends like this.
Sullivan, no! Hold on! You're gonna be okay! Corpsman!
So now Roebuck is the sergeant. He needs a sidekick named Sears, but I'm not going to mention that. This game doesn't pull any punches. Our friends get killed, we see blood splatter when we shoot an enemy, and then there's this. Dude, nasty. It seems like a really cruel way to take him out. But you know what? This is what it was like. Everybody did what they had to do to survive and win. It's easy to look back now and say, you shouldn't have done it that way, but here's an important fact. We weren't there. I'm not going to judge anybody for anything. This game tells it like it was. That's good enough for me. Further on, you get to take out some guys with a bazooka.
Okay.
No, you actually know how to use one. You take the airfield, then a jillion Japanese soldiers try to take it back.
Get on that triple 25!
All I can say is, wow. From Peleliu, suddenly we're in Stalingrad. Now, I can hear you saying, come on, Stalingrad again? Every game does that. I said the same thing, and it's true. But this one has a bit of a twist. We're not there very long, really just long enough to get introduced to our character Dimitri and his groupie, Sergeant Reznov. We start out playing dead. No, like this. Yeah, the Germans are going around slaughtering the wounded Russians. You and Reznov survive by pretending to be dead, and once the Germans are gone, you and he regroup. Reznov is now on a personal vendetta. He wants the general who ordered this massacre. Along the way, you run into some other Russian soldiers, and they're assaulting a communications center. The Nazis kind of overrun your position, and this happens. Death by dog. That's another new wrinkle. You hunt the general all over the city and finally track him down to a spot where he's trying to make a run for it. I dislike this level for several reasons. For one thing, Reznov never shuts up. And he's as much help as a sore foot because he just screams generalities at you and doesn't really tell you anything. The first couple of times I did this, I couldn't even figure out where the general was, much less take him out. Then when I finally figured out what was going on, I was too slow and he got away. But eventually I got him, and you will too. Here's a big hint. Shoot both the driver and the general just as the general gets in the car. It's hard to tell which blob is the general, so just shoot everything you can see in the car and you'll get it. And that's it for Stalingrad. Next we move on to 3 years later at Seelow. No, it's a town in Germany. The German army is in full retreat and the Russians are pursuing with blood in their eyes. Apparently, Reznov is so angry he's developed some special abilities. Listen to what he says here.
Up there! On the balcony! And They're fine!
I didn't see anything up on the balcony. You saw that I found that Panzerschreck next to that burning truck. But later... So it was up there, but on the other side of the house. Reznov saw it, not just through a wall, but through the entire building. I'm glad he's on our side. Reznov in particular wants every last German soldier dead. This leads to some uncomfortable situations.
Sergeant Reznov, you seem to relish in the slaughter.
I've seen my friends die in front of me at the hands of this world. They deserve everything they get, and more.
You finish clearing out the Nazi camp, and then we're back to Peleliu.
The enemy's dug in deep, and we have to get our hands dirty. Flamethrowers. We'll burn them out.
As I said before, this is pretty basic gameplay, and thankfully, the enemies covered in burning napalm aren't too realistic. You clear out 3 mortar pits and then move on to your next task, rooting the remaining Japanese defenders out of caves and other hidey holes near their remaining artillery. Suddenly, you have a machine gun and a trench gun. Oh, that's militaries for shotgun, by the way. It's really useful if the enemy's about 18 inches away. Otherwise, not so much. There's more of this, of course. You clear out a couple of anti-tank sites and move on. Now you're joined by something totally different. A tank with a flamethrower instead of a cannon. I have no words. How brainwashed do you have to be to hold your position in the face of that? Your goal is some caves at the top of the hill where the Japanese have dug in their heavy guns to use against our ships. It's pretty straightforward gameplay and totally gratifying when you finally beat it. Meanwhile, back in Seelow, we see what's happening with Dimitri. As this part opens, you're driving a tank. Notice how he keeps shouting orders but doesn't really tell you anything. Honestly, dude, I could do this a lot better and more efficiently if you would sit down and shut the hell up. The good news is, driving a tank is a lot easier than it was in the earlier games. The response is much smoother, the controls are a lot more intuitive, and you don't have a machine gun to fiddle with. Instead, you have one of those massive flamethrowers like we saw in the previous level, and it's a blast to use.
Fire the flamethrower! Incinerate them! Two down!
Once you're done taking Seelow as far as the train station, you board the railroad and head for Berlin. You have now become the almighty Dimitri, and Reznov is your prophet.
In Berlin, the Germans will truly see what they have unleashed. In the midst of all the blood, the bullets, and the dead, I found that an old friend was still very much alive. Dimitri Petrenko. I saw this man cheat death, time after time at the siege of Stalingrad. As long as he lives, the heart of this army cannot be broken. He makes us all proud.
Gee, no pressure. In Berlin, Reznov is still bloodthirsty, and it's starting to rub off.
Mercy, you do not deserve mercy! What mercy did you show to our people? To die! Wait! He may help us! He can die for us! Mudak! This is not war! This is murder!
The Germans are resisting heavily. You have to go underground to get around them, and the tunnels are full of smoke. But even when you're underground in Berlin and your lungs are burning, Reznov can't stop singing your praises.
I can barely see! I can hardly breathe!
Just keep low. In Stalingrad, Dimitri and I go through many smoke-filled buildings. Do you hear him complaining?
All hail the mighty Dimitri! As long as he lives, we will be victorious. As long as he is breathing, we cannot fall. As long as he... Well, crap, let's go home.
So you're fighting Germans through the streets of Berlin until you find yourself sort of trapped and you head underground into the metro. Down there, you're continuing the fight until this happens. The objective is complete. You drowned.
When we shipped out for Okinawa, the airfield became a vital asset in the campaign. Among those stationed there are the crews of the U.S. Navy Black Cats.
Back to the Pacific, where you're a gunner with a flying squadron known as the Black Cats. The intro is a little vague, but from what I can gather, their mission is a combination of search and rescue, plus do as much damage to the enemy as they can. Everybody's heading for Okinawa because the airfield at Peleliu is a major asset for taking that key island. But things are turning sour and several ships on their way to Okinawa have been attacked and are sinking. So the Black Cat Squadron is on its way to the rescue. You come upon some Japanese cargo ships going the same direction and conclude that they're probably loaded with supplies for the enemy. You radio headquarters and get the green light to take them out. Now, the plane you're on has 4 gun turrets, and sooner or later, you'll man them all. This involves running back and forth like the proverbial chicken. Now, apparently, the plane only has 2 gunners, but it has 4 turrets. So why doesn't it have 4 gunners? Why not have somebody on each of the guns instead of making your guys do this all day? Don't ask, just go with it. The good news about this is, you don't actually have to use the controls to move the guy from one turret to another. While you're in this turret, you hit a button and he moves to the next one and mounts the gun. After you sink the ships you were targeting, you get word that some American ships have been attacked and there are survivors in the water. That means it's your job to get over there and rescue them. But a bunch of Japanese Zeros have other ideas. So we start shooting them. And yet again, Call of Duty does something we don't expect. There's no minimum number of planes to shoot down. You just shoot as many as you can in the time you have, and the game keeps score for you. It's a very nice twist on a common aspect of shooter-type gameplay. You keep doing that until your companion plane crashes. Your plane ends up doing a belly flop in the water, where you start fighting off enemy PT boats and trying to rescue the American survivors. And here's where it gets a little weird. Okay, I was doing what the prompt said and pulling the guy into the plane, and I got killed in the process. So, following the game's directions got me a game over. Sure. I discovered, after some experimentation, that you don't have to pull the guy in right away. You can take out a couple of PT boats and then rescue him. It works much better because you don't have to keep doing the same rescue over and over and over and over and... Sorry, got stuck there for a second. After you rescue the right number of men, you have to try and shoot down enemy fighter planes until the American planes arrive. Once they do, you take off and head for home. This is a really fun level, though it's incredibly difficult in places. And it's a nice break from the usual ground pounder stuff. Once again, Call of Duty keeps it interesting by throwing in something totally unexpected. Like the run-and-shoot Jeep ride in the first game, it's way too short. I think they could have done a lot more with this, but instead they used it as a kind of an intermission between Europe and the Pacific. Hey, I'll take it.
Excellent.
Next, you're Private Miller again, and you're assaulting the island of Okinawa. You deal with the usual sneak attacks popping up from what Roebuck calls spider holes, and of course there are the good old bonsai attacks. I think I like bonsai better when it's a tree. You clear out some artillery positions and some mortar pits, and then you get to do something completely different.
One down.
That beats the snot out of a grenade. Check out the firepower. So you take those out, and then you're off to assault a place called Shuri Castle, which is supposed to be mostly deserted. Yeah, sure. Or should I say, yeah, Shuri. You clear the place out, and then you find this.
Polanski, search him.
On the ground, now!
Keep those hands up.
Shit!
Miller!
Roebuck! Miller! They killed the Sarge! The bastards killed him! You sons of bitches!
As you saw, the original sergeant for your squad was killed pretty early on. That wasn't too traumatic for the player because we didn't really know him. We've gotten to know Roebuck a little, and we know he was a really good guy who genuinely tried to look out for his men. But there's no time to mourn for him right now, because all the Japanese soldiers on the planet are after you. Fortunately, you can now call in airstrikes. After the airstrikes, reinforcements arrive and the enemy leaves. Before this mission to the castle started, Roebuck made a little speech. Once the battle's done, we hear that speech again, but it has very different overtones this time.
Everything that was asked of us, we've done. Every night we lay in a filthy foxhole praying the enemy won't slit our throats. Every day was spent crawling through the mud and the dirt while bullets whistle all around. This is the enemy's last stand. When we take Shuri Castle, we go home. All of us.
After that, we're back to Berlin. Reznov is still your groupie, holding you up as the example of everything that is good and noble in a Russian soldier. He drags you out of the flooded metro, gives you a machine gun, and off you go. We're headed for the Reichstag, which was the German parliament building. By this time, Hitler is already dead and his bunker's been taken, but his Special Forces SS troops are still holding on to this building, so we have to go in and take it from them. First, of course, we have to get there.
Keep going, Dimitri!
Once you've taken out all of the 88s, you try to storm the building itself. It's not easy, and the Germans are trying to be a little sneaky at times. To make matters worse, there's a guy up in one of the high windows of the Reichstag building, and he's firing a bazooka.
I believe you will find that the correct term is...
I know. Panzerschreck. Eventually, you figure out the secret of getting inside. Now you have to clear the whole place out. This involves general fighting, using a bazooka. Shut up and look at this. And sniping. Among other things. The non-stop action that characterizes Call of Duty was never on display more clearly than it is here. This whole Reichstag sequence is just incredible, and if you don't play it in one sitting, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. So eventually, you fight your way to the roof, where Reznov pulls down the Nazi flag and gives you the honor of raising the Soviet flag. Of course, it's never easy.
You can make it, my friend. You always survive. The honor should be yours. As long as you live, the heart of this army can never be broken.
After successfully planting the flag, Dimitri Petrenko immediately turned around and emptied his submachine gun into Sergeant Reznov while screaming, "Shut up!" and punctuated with a wide variety of Russian expletives. His comrades were forced to cut him to ribbons, as they had discerned, correctly, that he had in fact lost his marbles.
We finish with an extended cutscene about the Enola Gay dropping the first ever atomic bomb, and General MacArthur's speech about the treaty after Japan surrendered. A final graphic tells us this. This one tends to be a lot less linear than the previous games. You can take different paths, flank your enemies, climb up into a building and snipe, that sort of thing. It follows a definite path, but along the way you have choices. That's a very nice feature because it means next time you play, you can go back and do this or that a different way and see what happens. So replay value is high. The main game itself is kind of short compared to the others, but the developers made up for that in a lot of ways. There's online multiplayer, of course, but it also has a split-screen co-op. As you can see, it's the main campaign, kind of like what the first Halo game does, except that it includes giving both players points for things like kills. The biggest difference is, in the original Halo split screen, you could still tell what the heck is going on. One of the most annoying features of newer games is the way the graphics, especially in split-screen situations like this, are designed for enormous high-definition TV screens. Hey people, it's like this. I can either afford to buy that gigantic TV, or I can afford to buy your damn game. Most gamers don't have the resources to do both. Get a clue! This split-screen feature could really get interesting, especially for things like flanking maneuvers, but neither my game buddy Natorni nor I could see what was going on, so we gave up after a few minutes. The tiny images and fonts also started giving me a headache. If I ever get a TV that covers an entire wall, I might try it again. Or not. It also includes a little arcade game called Nazi Zombies. I haven't gotten very far into it, but what I've done is a kit. Give it a try and tell me what you think of it. I do have a couple of issues with the game in general. Stock dialogue, for example. A lot of phrases, and especially commands, get reused way too much. But that's how it goes with any game that uses stock dialogue. I had hoped the Call of Duty folks would have gotten a little more sophisticated on that front by this time, but oh well. My other issue is a matter of the attempts at realism. Actually, realism in terminology. In the levels in the Pacific, several times you hear Roebuck or somebody else shout, "Japanese infantry!" I understand what we're doing here, but either we're going for realism or we're not. The game already includes Boku use of some of those socially unacceptable expletives that we didn't use in the previous games, so if you're going to make the dialogue realistic, go all the way. Let's face it, American Marines on Peleliu or Okinawa would not have said Japanese infantry. They would have screamed Japs! Or, more likely, motherfucking Japs! I have no problem respecting everybody of every culture and ethnicity today, but this was a very different time. If you're going to try and picture it realistically, don't half-ass it for fear of offending somebody. Just do it. Our side wasn't always blameless and perfect in this whole thing either, and it doesn't hurt to show it in some small way like this. Having said that, these are minor quibbles, and they don't keep me from enjoying the game again and again and again. All in all, this one's a keeper. I'm Irving, and I have no life, just like you.
Well, finally, Irving got 3 slugs in the belly. It was right outside the frontier deli. He was sitting there twirling his gun around, and Butterfingers Irving gunned himself down. Irving. Big fat Irving. Big dum-dum Irving.
I missed my
42nd fastest gun in the West.